Welcome to Lesson 11 in Through the New Testament in Ancient Greek for Absolute Beginners. My name is Helene Iste, and I'm your guide as we read through the New Testament in its original beautiful language, the language of ancient Greece, which coincidentally was called Hellenistai. Because each lesson will build on previous lessons, be sure to start with Lesson 1. Let's get started. In today's lesson, we'll read through Matthew 5 through the end of the chapter from verses 31 through 48, which is a continuation of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be talking about his words about divorce, vows, and loving your enemies. And in the course of reading these verses, we'll be talking about relative pronouns. We've already learned about personal pronouns, but now let's learn about relative pronouns, has, he, and ha. And then we're going to learn about conjunctions, new conjunctions, the mယာτη and haughty. We've talked about haughty before. We're just going to go into a little bit more depth on it. Particles, ne and u, which is yes and no. And the imperative mood, which is one of the moods of verbs. This is for commands. So let's go ahead and start with verse 31 of Matthew 5, talking about divorce. Erethe de has an apaluse ten gunaika autou, dato aute apostasion. Ego de lego humin, hati pas ha apaluon ten gunaika autou, parektas lagu porneias. Poie autein moikiuthenai, kai has ean apalelumenein, game se, moikatai. All right, the first thing I'm going to point out here is what we call relative pronouns. Here it's being translated, since it's standing all alone, it's the noun that stands in for the subject. Whoever, has. And it's used in both places, both up in verse 31 at the beginning, whoever divorces his wife. And then down here, we have has, meaning whoever who's been divorced and marries again will be committing adultery. So whoever in these two cases is used as the subject of the clause, the noun. You can also use it as who. So you can say the man who, and then that would be has, or it could be a lot of different forms. Let's go ahead and talk about those forms. So without needing to memorize, I just want to make sure you're aware that, of course, has, he, and ha are going to be your nominative singular forms. And then you also have genitive forms, which are very similar to your article. And we talked about this briefly last time. We have who, has, and who. And your dative, ho, he, and ho. And accusative, han, hain, and ha. So remember, the neuter is always the same in a nominative and accusative. And you always have the same masculine neuter genitive and masculine and neuter dative. So that really helps out. And remember that we talked about how this is very similar to the definite article, except you don't have that tau. So you have ha as the masculine article, but then it goes to tu. That's tau, omicron, upsilon. So tu, to, ton. So you can tell the difference between the definite article, the, and this relative pronoun because it doesn't have that tau. Same with te, taste, te, and tain. You don't have, well, this should have an iota subscript here. I just noticed an error. It removes the tau, and also the neuter article has a t, a tau, ta, tu, to, ta. So you can tell the difference in that way. And then the plural is the same for the masculine plural of the article as it is with the relative pronoun. So you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but sometimes they use hoitinis, those who. And hi is the same as well for the feminine plural nominative. In ha is the same for the neuter. But then you don't have tone. You have own, and then hois, heis, hois instead of tois, tais, tois. And then the accusative is us without the tau, as, ah. So you don't have the same, and the definite article for the neuter is ta. So you can tell the difference between the definite article and the relative pronoun. All right, so don't worry about memorizing that. Just be aware that these exist. One thing I might say, we usually have in English, we have actually a word for this genitive form. It's called whose. So the boy whose ball went into the bushes. This would be modifying the boy, belonging to the boy, the ball. Or the girl whose name is Maria. Or the animal whose fur is very soft is a rabbit. So these are actually translated. There's a form in English for that, the whose. Another thing that you'll see is these forms, Hostas and Hades, and that's generally what you would use for whoever or whichever or whatever, though in the previous verse we had just had Hos, you just remember. So those are a little bit interchangeable. This is generally the form you would use just by itself as a noun. All right, so just wanted to show you again where those are used. Let's go ahead and move on. All right, starting at verse 33, we have pollen, ekusate hati erethe, tois archaios, uk epi orkeses, apadoses de to curio tus horcus su. Ego de lego humin, me amasai halos. Mete ento urano, hati thranas estin tu theu, mete ente ge, hati hupapadion estin ton padon autu, mete eis hierosaluma, hati palis estin tu megalu basileos, mete ente kafale su, amases, hati u dunasai mian trika lucain poiesai, melainan, esto de halagas hemon, nai, u, ta de perison tuton ek tu poneru estin. All right, so let's talk about the two conjunctions here, which we haven't really seen before. Well, we've seen hati before, but I'm going to go in a little more depth. We've also seen de a lot. You should know those. But the ones I wanted to talk about here are going to be first mete. Mete is a combination of me, which means not, and de. So mete would mean neither, so not either, or and not, nor. So usually you'll have neither by heaven, nor by earth, nor by Jerusalem, nor by the head, and so on. So it's a great way of just kind of emphasizing these are all not ways that you should be swearing. All right, the next thing I want to point out is hati. And the thing I want to point out is that you can't always assume that it's going to mean a certain thing. It'll mean within the same verses, it'll mean two different things sometimes. So here at the very beginning, it's a word that you would use as that, like you have heard that, and it describes what you've heard, right? So it's introducing what we call indirect discourse, what somebody else said. It could also introduce direct course, like he said, I love you to Sally. So it's not you saying I love you, it's he said it. So that we call direct discourse. So both indirect and direct discourse can be introduced with hati. But here it means because. In all of these, actually, the repetitive use of hati is just kind of emphasizing why you shouldn't swear by any of these four different things. So you shouldn't swear by heaven because that's God's throne, and because earth is the footstool that God puts his feet on, or by Jerusalem because that's the city of the great king, because you can't make your hair white or black. So these are all because. So here we have two different ways that hati is used. Just want to point that out. The next thing I want to point out in this verse is the use of nai and u. Now, a lot of times when you study ancient Greek, it takes a long time before you realize how to say yes. That's usually one of the first words you learn when you learn a foreign language. But actually, it's good because in our study of Matthew, it's used pretty early on in the chapter 5. So let your yes be a yes, and let your no be a no. So ne in Greek, or nai in the pronunciation that we have assigned for ancient Greek, is yes. Even though in English, usually when we think of ne, we think of no, but it's a little confusing. Just think that ne is yes in Greek as opposed to what you would expect. Things in Greek are always a little bit different than what you'd expect. And then u, we've been seeing u before verbs to negate it, so we kind of recognize it as meaning no. In English, that usually means something like surprise, like ooh, but it means no in Greek. So nai and u, yes and no. All right, let's go ahead and read the next verses. from Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42. Ekusate hati erethe, ophthalmon anti ophthalmou, kai adanta anti adantas. Ego de lego humin, me antistenai toponero. Al hostis se rapise esten dexian siagona su. Strephan auto, kai ten alain. Kai to thelanti soi crithenai, kai tan kitona su labain. Office auto kai ta himation, kai hostis se angaruse, milion hen. Hupage met autu dua, to aitunti se, das, kai tan thelanta apasu danisasthai me apostrophes. All right, in these verses, I'm just going to point out the use of the relative pronouns, which we've been talking about. So in this case, we do have hostis in place of hos. Remember, we talked about the previous verses, it was using hos as that substantive relative pronoun, standing in for the one who or whoever. And then here we have the same thing, but instead, whoever strikes you on your right cheek, go ahead and turn to him your other cheek. And then here, and whoever makes you go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. So here we have another use of whoever, which is our relative pronoun. Our next verses are Matthew 5, verses 43 through 45. Ekusate hati erethe, agapeses tan plesion su, kai miseses tan ekthron su. Ego de lego humin, agapate tus ekthrus hemon, kai pros eucheste huper ton diokonton humas. Eulagete tus kateromenus humas, kalos poiete tois epereazonton humas, kai misusin humas, hapos geneste huioi tu patras hemon tu en uranois, hatitan helion autu anatele epi ponerus kai agathus, kai breke epidikaius, kai adicus. All right, now we're going to talk about the imperative mood, which is a command. In English, we would use a command whenever we ask someone to do something. We would say, go to the store. Go is your command. Or you could say, be nice, or share your toys. Be and share are all commands. Very simple in English. Well, in Greek, of course, ancient Greek at least, it wasn't that simple at all. And there are actually a few more forms than this, so I'm just going to talk about these for now. But you can see when you're reading through Bible Hub that you will have a verb as a V, and then dash, and then P stands for present tense, and then the M here is imperative. That's why I have this M in red. So imperative is going to have an M. I was already taken, I guess. So when you see that M in the middle, you know it's imperative. Here's another one. It's actually kind of in the middle here. It's always going to be after that first letter, that present. Here, this M, the last M/P means middle/passive. Don't worry about that yet. But this M is imperative, imperative, imperative. And these are actually all 3 present imperatives. So they're going to be called PMA. And then that's active, A for active. And then you're also going to have PM, either middle or passive. And another thing in Greek is you actually can talk to a group of people as well as just a single person. In English, we would say, be quiet, and you can talk to one person and say be, and you talk to a whole room of people and it would all still be be. But in Greek, you have 2 different imperatives for singular second person and plural second person. And another thing is, we'll see this actually in the coming verses, you have an imperative form for third person singular. So you can give a command to someone that's not the person you're talking to. And in Greek, it's kind of interesting. We don't really have that. We have let it or let that person go, let him go. That would be a way of kind of doing it in English. But in Greek, we actually have words to emphasize that it's third person, and for both singular and plural. And then you have passive. Now, reminding you of what passive is, you could say, go write, or say, write this down. And then you could have a passive, let it be written down, something like that. So it's, instead of doing the writing, somebody else is doing the writing. So it's written. It is written. So the M here is for imperative, but these are middle and passive. And we'll talk about those. That's called a voice. That's the middle, or either active, middle, or passive in Greek. And then down here you have another version of imperative, which is aorist. The aorist form is a little different. So we're not going to learn all these forms. I just wanted to point out to you that there are a lot of ways of using commands in Greek. All right, so let's talk about some other uses of the imperative in Matthew 5. These are present, rejoice, and exult. That's Jesus is telling people, if people say bad things about you, rejoice, kairete, and exult, agaliaste. Here's an example of a middle passive form, which we'll talk about in the future, don't worry, but that's why it's M/P instead of active. It's middle passive. And then here's an example of an aorist, active imperative, lampsato. And this is an example of a third person singular. It's actually, Jesus is telling your light to shine, the light that is within you. So he's talking to the light, basically. Well, he's talking to you, but he's referencing the light. Let the light shine. So in English, it's kind of translated let shine, but it's not really. That sounds like almost like you're permitting it to shine, let it shine. But it's actually, in Greek, it's very clear that he's saying, shine, light. He's talking to the light. So that's the third person singular. And then here we have another present imperative. That's active tense. Go away. Hupake. Hupage. That's the same word that Jesus used to tell Satan to go away in the desert. Hupage satana, if you remember that. All right, and then we have prosfere. Prosfere. Offer. Offer your gift. This is present imperative active. Offer. And then here is our B is isthi in Greek. I like that, isthi. So it's present active imperative, second person singular. In this case, he's talking to one person. Be agreeing with your accuser. So quickly agree with your accuser before you go to court, basically, while you're on your way. And then he uses it in verse 29, exale, exale, pluck out your eye. Kaibale, cast it. These are both aorist. So just like up here, we have let your light shine, pluck out your eye, cast your eye. These are kind of quick commands, things you can do quickly. All right, and then we have another aorist here, ekapsan, cut off your hand if it causes you to sin, and cast it, also aorist, imperative, active. And then here we have another form of to be. In this case, it's the third person singular. Let your word be. It's hard to express in English. It's Jesus saying to your word, let your statement, let your word be yes if it's yes, and no if it's no. So that's a third person singular imperative. All right, so don't worry about the forms yet. You can see some of the commonalities here, like the omega at the end and the epsilon at some of the ends here. Exele, hupage, bale, and then ete is the plural, but we'll learn those later. I just want to kind of introduce you so you can recognize them now. All right, let's go ahead and read Matthew 5, verses 46 through 48, and we'll finish off chapter 5. Kai gar agapesete, tous agapontas humas, tina mistan echete, uchi kai hoi telonai ta auta poiusin, kai ean astaseste tous adelphus hemon manan ti perison poiete, uchi kai hoi ethnikoi ta auta poiusin, eseste un humes teleoi, hos ha pater humon ha uranias teleias estin. let's just go through these 3 verses, and I'm just going to point out what we've learned so far. So it's kind of a good review. Here we have a conjunction, which is a small word that joins 2 different clauses, so 2 different kind of thoughts. In this case, kai is usually means and. Here's another conjunction, gar, which means for or because. And then here we have a verb, agapao, which is used as a subjunctive. So we'll talk about verbs, all the different tenses of the verbs in the future, but right now it's if you love. Those who love you. Here, tous is an article. Here we have what's called a participle, and we haven't talked about that yet, but those who love, who are loving you. Humas is your personal pronoun, which is in the accusative because it's the object of those who are loving. And then tina, we'll talk about in the future, is the word for what. Misthon is a noun, which is in the accusative because it's the object of have. What reward do you have if you love those who love you already? Do not also the tax collectors? Uhi is basically a particle, so it's a good way to introduce sentences that you expect the answer to be yes. Also, kai here is also the tax collectors. So here we have the article that goes with tax collectors and is in the nominative because it's the sentence's subject. Masculine plural, so the article matches the telonai tax collectors, who were hated in that day because they served the Romans, and the Jews hated the Romans who had taken over their land, did not want to pay taxes to them especially. So the Jews that became tax collectors were especially hated. So do they not do the same? Ta, auta. In this case, this is a word that is used as a substantive, the same thing here. Puyusin, do. So don't the taxpayers do the same thing? And again, if aspaseste, that means you greet or you welcome into your home, only your brothers, here manan, we get a lot of words in English that start with mono, are kind of indicating that it's only or singular. Only your brothers. What's so great about that? What great thing are you doing? Uhi, do not. Kai, hoi, ethnikoi, that means the people of the nations, the Gentiles is what it's translated to English, the non-Jews. Ta, auta, poiusin, do the same. Eseste un, you shall be. This is almost like an imperative, but it's more of it's in using the future instead. We do that in English too. You shall not murder. You will not murder. It's the same thing as saying don't murder. Un is therefore. Humes teleoi. So you therefore shall be perfect, just as hosts, your Father who is heavenly. This is an adjective. And remember, you can use this article, the definite article, to connect an adjective to the main noun. So your Father who is heavenly. So ha pater hamon ha uranios. This is also can be like who, which is we talked about the relative pronoun. So it's either the definite article or we could talk about it, you could translate it as who. Teleos estin. So Jesus concludes this chapter with a very difficult statement for us. Just as our Heavenly Father is perfect, we should be perfect. And we're left thinking, but that's impossible. It is impossible, but Jesus can give you his perfection. So good place to end. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us for Lesson 11, and I hope you keep sticking with us.